Good morning, students. Now we'll discuss about conclusions drawn from Croning-Penny model. What are the conclusions we can make from Croning-Penny model? Last class we have seen solution to the equations. The Croning-Penny got the solution as P sin alpha A by alpha A plus cos alpha A is equal to cos Ka. So we have drawn the graph between LHS of this equation. LHS of the equation with respect to alpha A. The variation of LHS P sin alpha A by alpha A plus cos alpha A with respect to alpha A. And RHS of this equation cos Ka. Cos varies between -1 to +1. So after drawing this graph, this energy spectrum, we can observe this energy spectrum consists of both allowed bands and forbidden bands. Here allowed bands are separated by forbidden bands. So first conclusion is the energy spectrum of electron consists of number of allowed and forbidden energy bands. So this is the first conclusion. Next one, see here, as alpha A is increasing. So as alpha A increases, what about the width of allowed bands? What about the width of allowed bands? It increases. So as alpha A increases, width of allowed bands increases. So this is the second conclusion. As alpha A increases, the width of the allowed bands increases and width of the forbidden bands decreases. Now, if P increases, what happens? Width of the forbidden bands increases and width of the allowed bands decreases. Okay. Next, fourth conclusion is as P tends to infinity. So when P tends to infinity, what happens to this equation? So see here, as P tends to infinity, what is the equation we have? P sin alpha A by alpha A plus cos alpha A is equal to cos K. So this is the equation. This is the solution we got. So how to believe that this equation is true? So in order to believe that this equation is true, because Croning-Penny has made many assumptions. After making many assumptions, he got this solution. So how to believe that this equation is correct? So if this could satisfy both classical mechanics and quantum mechanics, we can believe that this equation is true. Okay. Now, as P tends to infinity, when P tends to infinity. So if P becomes infinity, what I can write? Infinity means 1 by 0. 1 by 0 sin alpha A by alpha A plus cos alpha A is equal to cos K. So if I take LCM, what happens? 1 into sin alpha A. Sin alpha A plus this is, if I take LCM, this becomes 0 divided by 0 is equal to cos K. So implies sin alpha A is equal to 0. So for what value of alpha A? It is 0. Sin 0 is 0. Sin pi is 0. 2 pi is 0. 3 pi is 0. 4 pi is 0. So I can write alpha A is equal to n pi. So for alpha A is equal to, for each and every n pi value, sin is 0. So I can write it as alpha A is equal to n pi. So alpha is equal to n pi by A. Alpha square is equal to n square pi square by A square. So I can write it as n square pi square by A square. Okay. Now what is alpha square? We know what is alpha square. Alpha square is, we have taken in the previous equations, alpha square we took it as 2m e by h cross square. So 2m e by h cross square, this is from equation 3. 2m e by h cross square n square pi square by a square. So if I simplify this, e is equal to n square pi square by a square into h cross square by 2m, which is equal to n square pi square by a square. What is h cross? H by 2 pi. H cross is called as reduced Planck's constant. So h by 2 pi. So I can write it as h square by 4 pi square into 2m. So what happens? This pi square get cancelled. This pi square get cancelled. So what is the remaining one? E is equal to n square h square by 8m a square. So have you seen this expression anywhere? So this is the energy of a particle in one dimensional box. Energy of a particle in one dimensional box. So n can take the values 1, 2, 3, so on. So if I take E is equal to 1, here I can write En. So E1 becomes h square by 8m a square. E2 becomes 4h square by 8m a square. So from this we can say that energy is discrete. Energy is discrete. Means this supports quantum mechanics. It supports quantum mechanics. Means from this expression, so see here, as p tends to infinity, what happens? It is supporting quantum mechanics. Means it is band spectrum is becoming line spectrum. So here p tends to infinity, alpha a. If I draw a graph, I am getting a line spectrum because these are energy levels. Line spectrum. So this expression proves quantum mechanics. This is fourth conclusion. So see here what we have written fourth conclusion. As p tends to infinity, the allowed band energy bands become infinitely narrow and energy spectrum is a line spectrum. So it supports quantum mechanics. Okay. Next, as p tends to 0, what happens as p tends to 0? Now as p tends to 0, what is the expression we have? P sin alpha a by alpha a plus cos alpha a is equal to cos k. So if what happens if p is 0, this whole term becomes 0. So what is left? Cos alpha a is equal to cos k. So what happens? Alpha a is equal to k. Alpha is equal to k. So alpha square is equal to k square. What is alpha square? 2me by h cross square is equal to k square. So implies E is equal to, so E is equal to, I can write it as k square h cross square divided by k square h cross square divided by 2m. So implies I can write it as E is equal to k square h square is nothing but momentum p square divided by 2m. Why it is p square? See here, k means wave number, 2 pi by lambda. H cross is h by 2 pi. Okay, if I do k square h cross square, which is equal to 4 pi square lambda square into 4 pi square h cross square by, what is h cross? H square by 4 pi square. So h square by 4 pi square. So 4 pi square get cancelled. We will get h square by lambda square. So we know de Broglie's wavelength lambda is equal to h by p. From this what is p? H by lambda. So here I am having h square by lambda square. So I can write it as p square. I can write it as p square. So from this I got h cross square k square is nothing but p square. So E is equal to, what is P? Momentum. Momentum can be written as mass into velocity. So m square v square divided by 2m, which is equal to half mv square. So here kinetic energy is equal to half mv square. This proves classical mechanics. According to classical mechanics, energy is continuous, no energy states. So this supports classical mechanics. So when p tends to infinity, it supports quantum mechanics. When p tends to 0, it supports classical mechanics. So no energy levels exist. All energies are allowed to electrons. Means no forbidden bands, no allowed bands. Energy is continuous, no energy levels. So this is the case of free electron theory. So see here, as p tends to 0 alpha a, the states, see here, there is no energy states. It is energy is continuous. Like this, it is energy is continuous. Okay. So it supports classical mechanics. So these are the conclusions drawn from Kronig-Penney model. So what are the conclusions we have drawn? The energy spectrum consists of allowed bands and forbidden bands. As alpha A increases, width of allowed bands increases. As P increases, width of forbidden bands increases. At P tends to 0, it becomes a line spectrum. It supports quantum mechanics. As P tends to 0, it supports classical mechanics. Okay, these are about the conclusions of Kronig-Penney model. So if conclusions are given separately, you need to derive all these things.